Hey, good morning, everyone. My voice is as good as it's going to get, so just hang in there with me. Um, I lost my voice several weeks ago, and it's taken its sweet time to get back. And I don't know where you are at on this Monday morning, but here in Rolla, it is -9. At least it was about a couple hours ago when I woke up. I'm sure it's a teeny bit warmer, probably -5, but that is far too cold for me. So I could not even function outside in this kind of weather, even all entirely bundled up. Um, and so that's a hard pass, but it's a beautiful time to stay inside and to read, do our study, get it done. I've been sewing a lot, um, getting some projects caught up, and so anyway, we're gonna jump in and get started. We're actually going to go through two sections. So if you were in class with me, this would have been two separate sections on the board. Remember, we separate them out for the sake of chronology because we jump back and forth. And so we will do the first three, which is one little section here, and then we'll just go ahead and continue because it stays in the same order right on through. But I'll give you those new verses, and of course, if you're looking at this now, you can see it down in the comments, the two separate sections that I'm referring to. So uh, right now we're going to be in Matthew 26. Again, I use Bible Hub, just saved up here, right? Choose your version that you like to read and jump on over to the book and verse that you're starting in. And so, or excuse me, chapter that you're starting in. We're going to be in Matthew 26, Mark 14, and Luke 22 for this first section here. We are not going to read Mark 14 together. You can go through and do that on your own. That's Mark 14, 10 through 17. And that's because he says the same thing that Matthew and Luke say. And Matthew and Luke they kind of go together and parallel each other with information that we need. And so we're actually going to start in Luke. So Luke 22. We're going to read 1 through 6 first. We're going to end up reading through 18, and then we're going to jump over to Matthew 26. And we're going to start in verse 14. But right now, um, Luke gives us a little bit more information. And remember, Luke is the one we get our chronology, our order from. But he gives us just a little bit more to start with, and then we'll jump over into Matthew. And so in this section, we're going to be talking about, as you can see, the headliners there, the plot to kill Jesus. So it's going to be Judas's betrayal, and then the introduction to this last Passover dinner. And so that they're going to have and then in the next video, we're going to actually start and start discussing that meal. So let's go ahead and begin in Luke 22, 1 through 6. Now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called Passover. And the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people. So this would be, of course, they're seeking to kill Jesus, and they feared the people. This means that there's that mob mentality, right? That's actually how Jesus got convicted, is the mob mentality. Um, and so, right now, even if they don't believe in Jesus as their king or Lord and Savior, they believe that he's a prophet. They believe that, he is somebody sent from God. And, they've watched his healings, they've listened to his teachings. And so they don't want to be right out here in the population. You got to remember the umpteen hundreds of thousands of people that have traveled here for this meal from all over. So, or excuse me, for Passover. And so, yeah, just one meal. Wouldn't that be quite the trip? And so, for the whole Passover. And so, that's what it means when it says they feared the people. So let's continue on. Verse 3. Then Satan entered Judas, surnamed Iscariot, who was numbered among the 12. So I want to stop there for just a second. If you were in class with me, we discussed this, that something kind of stood out to me with that. We've always just known Judas Iscariot as the betrayer, Judas the betrayer, whatever. Um, but we've never really thought about the whys or the hows. At least I haven't. And so you've just always known that Judas was the one. And so then I see here that Satan entered Judas. Okay. So number one, Satan is not omnipresent, which means he's not present everywhere at all times, like God is. And so he can only be present in one place. Now, of course, his demons, and stuff are out there doing his work on his behalf, right? But um, Satan himself, is only singular, right? He can only be in one place at one time, and he chose at this moment to enter Judas. And so this is why Judas betrays Jesus, right? It's because it's actually Satan who's doing it. So then you wonder, like, well, how is that fair? Like how is that fair to Judas's, free will to have been overtaken by Satan, right? To be this person. And that's something to think about. Well, go ahead, Joe, jump into some other studies on that. Look that up. It's some interesting information, but really what it amounts to is that it's the way that Judas led his life, right? It's the moments that led up to this that Satan was able to enter him, right? And so, because remember, if we have free will, right? And you're with Christ. And just so you know, if you have the Holy Spirit within you as a saved believer of Jesus Christ, Satan cannot enter you. A demon, you cannot be possessed by a demon. We have no biblical evidence to support that. And so these would only be people who are not what we would call today a born again Christian. And so, of course, this is right before that moment when the Holy Spirit would have been present in every believer. So this is a little bit different, but they do still have free will. But this is going to be Judas's um, decisions that led to this moment in time, right? The way he lived his life, the way, he allowed things into his mind, into his life, into his heart, right? And so he was essentially an open door for Satan to walk into, is the easiest way to put it. And I can go down a rabbit hole with information on that related to several things like Halloween and movies and music and all the things. And so we won't go down that rabbit hole, but I encourage you, if you want to know, that did pique my interest. Okay, well, how is it Judas's fault, right? If it was Satan, but it's because Satan wouldn't have been able to enter him if the door wasn't open, right? And so that's the way that Judas lived his life. And of course, we know how that ends for Judas and how he felt about it after it was done. But let's continue. So that is what Luke adds to this little section here that Matthew doesn't, is that Satan entered Judas, surnamed Iscariot. Okay, let's pick up in verse 4. So he went his way and conferred with the chief priests and captains how he might betray him to them. So he's discussing with the chief priests, right, and the captains, how he, Judas, might betray Jesus to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. So he promised and sought opportunity to betray him to them in the absence of the multitude. So, of course, he's going to get close to Jesus. He's going to get him by himself. And Judas would be the perfect person to do that, right? Satan knows that these guys feared the people, right? And they're not going to do it in this huge crowd of people. And so, what better way than to be amongst, Jesus's 12? And so, let's jump over into Matthew's account now. And we're going to be in Matthew 26, starting in verse 14. And so, and we'll go ahead and read on through verse 20. Verse 14, then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest. See, we don't have here that Satan entered him, right? Um, and said, what are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you? And they counted out to him 30 pieces of silver. So from that time, he sought an opportunity to betray him. So something that Matthew adds that Luke didn't is this 30 pieces of silver. And the significance of this is not some just random number that they pulled out of a hat. Okay. It's actually very degrading. This is what a dead slave would have been worth in their time. And we get some of this information from Zechariah 11. Um, but this shows you their contempt towards Jesus, his worthlessness to them, right? That this is what they would have paid for a dead slave, right? Not just a slave, but a dead slave. So that's how little this money is, right? How little value this money has. And so this isn't just, Judas being greedy, which we already know that he stole from the coffers, right, and from the money box, and um, we already know that that was him. However, we know that this is Satan working through Judas. Judas didn't go in there and demand some astronomical amount of money, right? Satan settled for, oh, what's the least? A dead slave. Let's go for it, right? And so that's what the significance of this 30 pieces of silver is. And so something that is ironic, um, right? Which means something that happens that you wouldn't think that would happen, right? So something that's ironic is that um, he's talking to the chief priests, right, at the temple. So the money that's being given to Judas to betray Jesus is from the temple, right? And so they unknowingly at the time, right, purchased the temple sacrifice, the final sacrifice, right, with the temple money. And so, of course, they don't know right this moment that Jesus is going to be that final temple sacrifice, but they used temple money to purchase the temple sacrifice, right? And so, of course, they don't think that's what's happening, right? They think they're just being belittling and ridding, us of Jesus, but they actually bought the sacrifice through the temple, and so that's just kind of a little interesting tidbit there. And so um, let's go ahead and read on verse 17. Now, on the first day, so I will try to keep up with the days as much as possible as we have through the chronology here. So we're on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay. And so um, excuse me, the disciples came to Jesus, saying to him, "Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover?" And so this is going to be over in Leviticus 23, 6 through 8. This is one of the Levitical, is what we call Levitical feasts. And so that means it's one that's mentioned in their law, right? This is something that everybody had to partake in who was a partaker in the law, right? And so a Jew. So um, and he said, so Jesus, go into the city to a certain man and say to him, the teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples. Let's see, we're going to verse 20. Let's continue. So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared for the Passover. When the evening had come, he sat down with the 12. Now, as they were eating, he said, "Assuredly, I say to you, one will betray me." It's kind of an interesting place to just kind of leave off, right? And so, as far as in Matthew, and again, that's why we're going to actually continue on through our next section here. But we do this because of chronology. Just because it's written here verse by verse doesn't necessarily mean that that's the order that it happens. So we're actually going to jump back over into Luke, and he's going to give us a little bit more information than, hey, just go talk to some guy and he'll be the right one. Like we're all thinking, how in the world would they know who to talk to, right? And so Luke's going to answer that for us. So we'll start in verse 7 here. We'll read through 13. Then came the day of unleavened bread, when the Passover must be killed. And he sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat." So now we know who's being sent, right? And so that's always something to notate. Remember, when you're given a person, place, or time, that's something to highlight in your scripture, and that'll kind of bring back to memory the information here. So we know that he sent Peter and John to go prepare the Passover for us that we may eat. Okay. And so when it said, when the Passover must be killed, right? So this is when they would have gone and killed the lamb, right? And so because there's a certain amount of time that it has to set and go through the rituals of, the being blemish free and such. And so this is something to read into, but that's what it means when the Passover must be killed. This would have been the Passover lamb must be killed. And so they're preparing a place. So they said to him, "Where do you want us to prepare?" And this is where Luke gives us a little bit more information. Verse 10. And he said to them, "Behold, when you have entered the city, a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house which he enters. Then you shall say to the master of the house, 'The teacher says to you, Where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? Then he will show you a large, furnished upper room. There make ready." So they went and found it just as he had said to them, and they prepared the Passover. So the unique thing here is that, and actually, I was trying to find where I have the notes. Yeah, I do. Okay. So how they would have known, like you're thinking, oh man, you're entering into the city and it's a man carrying water, right? Well, the unique part is this is that men would not have been carrying water. This would have been a woman's chore duty. And to this day, it is still belonging to the woman. And so it was a woman that you would see carrying water. So it would have been very unique. It would have stood out that a man was carrying water, right? And it's the home of which he entered, and he's not the master of that house, right? And so, kind of putting all these pieces together of where are they going? How do they find this person? And Luke gave us that bit more of information. And so, um, we are going to go ahead and continue right on along. And we're actually going to be over in John 13. My kitty's meowing in the background, sorry. And so we're going to start over in John 13. And we're going to read, um, let's see, looks like we're going to read on through verse 18. And then we'll jump back over into Mark and Matthew. And so, John 13, verse 1. Now, before the feast of Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. So, this is kind of setting the tone of what's about to happen at this meal. That he didn't just wash his hands of them. He didn't just rush through things. Okay, 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 I'm done. My hour's come. Right? He loved them to the last moment. He served them. Excuse me. That we're going to see here in the upcoming verses that he served them. He loved them to the end, right? He never stopped just because his time had come and he knew what was about to happen, right? Verse 2. And supper being ended, the devil having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, rose from the supper and laid aside his garments, and took a towel and girded himself. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel which he was girded. And then he came to Simon Peter and said, Peter said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet? And Jesus answered and said to him, What I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this. Peter said to him, You shall never wash my feet. And Jesus answered and said to him, If I do not wash you, you have no part with me. And Simon Peter said to him, Well, Lord, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head, right? Pretty much give me a whole bath, right? If that's how it works. And so um, let's stop for just a moment. Um, let's see. I want to go back into my notes. So, starting over here in John 1 and 2, right, that we have Jesus and we have Judas right here. Okay, so it's actually 3 and 4. Judas is a picture and a type, right? We have this all throughout scripture. He's a picture and a type of the Antichrist, right? And just as we have picture and types of Jesus, we have pictures and types of the Antichrist, right? And several characters in the image of, in the likeness of, right? And so everything is one cohesive story of Christ. And so we don't always pick up on those things right away when we're reading. That's why it takes a deeper study, right? And so um, in verses 3 and 4 here, um, when Jesus is getting ready, okay, he rose from the table, he tied a garment around his waist, right, a towel, and then he washed their feet. So, what makes this particular thing unique is this is not like entering into a home, right, where a servant would have washed the feet after the sandals and the dirt and all those things, right? This is different. So, typically, the women would have come in and they would have washed their hands. Okay. And so, not, and this is following the first cup, which wasn't mentioned right there. There are 4 cups to this meal. We'll discuss that in a little bit more starting in the next section, but this is following the first cup. Okay. And so, if you want more information on that, it's definitely a good thing to go look up. And again, we'll talk about that in the next section. But following the first cup, they would have come in and they would have washed their hands. But Jesus is washing their feet, right? So this job, like I said, was typically done by a servant, right? This is different, right? Jesus stands out doing this, and he stands out in the sense of the sake of servanthood. How did he start this chapter? With he loved them to the end, right? He is serving them to the end. Um, and so in verse 6, then he came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet? And so there's emphasis here. It's emphatic. Like, this isn't a question like, oh Lord, are you going to do this for me? Right? This is like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, you're about to wash my feet. There's emphasis in his voice, right? And so remember, I like to add that. I'm not adding it. I like to research, and once you study and see that, okay, that's emphatic, to add that into their voices. And then we hear and we kind of see and we get more of their personality. We get more of their humanity. I almost said humanism. Is that a word? It is today. We get more of their humanity, right? We get more of their sense of realness, right? In the scripture as it comes to life, right? As we read, Lord, are you washing my feet? Right? Or if we were to say, kind of like when preachers are getting into it, right? Sometimes they're adding their own emphasis, but a lot of times it's actually because, upon deeper study into the Greek, especially, we can see when things are meant to be emphatic. And so this is very much so. Instead of a question mark, this should have been a question mark exclamation point, right? And so um, here, which is interesting, um, Peter, who we know is going to deny him. But we've got Peter, who just in the last chapter, I was going to flip back to it. I did in class, right? Is talking about serving him and loving him and wanting to be there with him, right, in the end, and right. He knows, he calls him Lord, he calls him Master, he calls him Teacher, right? And so he's all of these things to him, and so we already know where Peter stands with his reverence to Christ, right? But yet he seemingly has the audacity to say, like, you're going to do this to me, right? Like, just it's interesting because this is God, right? This is God in the flesh. And the things that, you know, we think and do, we're the same. We're exactly the same. We're no better or different than Peter, right? We just don't have God physically standing in front of us, because we wouldn't say or do probably half the things we say or do if God was physically standing in front of us and we know it, right? We probably wouldn't think the way that we do, say the things that we do, but a lot of things we do, right? And so we do say and think and do things, with audacity sometimes. And so we're no better or different. It's just it's kind of a little tidbit I call, like, a little funny, that like, oh, okay, Peter, right? Like, you saying this to God, right? And so then he kind of changes his tune when Jesus says, well, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. And Peter's like, whoa, pour it on, right? Like, wash my head, wash my hands, wash my feet, like every part of me, just give me a whole bath. Like, if that's what it takes to be a part of you, then I want it all, right? And so that again shows his reverence for Jesus. It's just that was kind of like a little audacity, a little snap back there, like, excuse me. And so um, we are going to continue on. Let's see, in verse 10. Jesus said to him, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew who would betray him. Therefore he said, you are not all clean. So that's why Jesus responds the way he does, because he got that reference, right? But my hands and my head and all the things, right? And that's why Jesus is like, man, you don't need a whole bath, right? Like, he's bathed, needs only to wash his feet, right? And this is the servanthood of Jesus. And so you are clean, he said, but not all of you. And he clarifies that in the very next sentence, but not all of you. Isn't all of you your whole body? It's all of you, as in the total amount of people that are there. And then for he said, you are not all clean. So again, it clarified immediately, for he knew who would betray him, right? So his betrayer, is there. So Verse 12. So when he had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I, then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them." And so, um, this is kind of bringing all together what I've been talking about through the last several verses, right? Jesus just kind of explained it all here. You call me, teacher, Lord, master, right? All these things, right? The reverence, excuse me, that we have for him, that they have for him, right? Then if I, right, the Lord of all, King, right, if I come and the greatest of all have put myself in this position, right, the lowliest position of all, then you too shall do it because you are not greater than your master, right? Nor is he greater than the one who sent him, right? The Lord above. And so, he came as a servant. And so, um, we are going to stop there for just a moment. Let's see. Um, Blessed are you if you do them, right? And so if they continue, um, let's jump over. Let's just read verse 18. Okay. I do not speak concerning all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but that the scripture may be fulfilled. He who eats bread with me has lifted up his heel against me. So he's cluing us in a little bit to his betrayer. Okay. About who it's going to be, right? It's somebody that's going to be in this room with them. Okay. Let's jump over into Mark 14 and we're going to read 14 through 18. I know bouncing around's a little hard. Hang in there with me. Remember, it's not written as one, story. And so it's, I should say, written in order. It is one story, it's not written in order. Verse 14 of Mark 14, verse 18. Okay, let's get there. So when the evening came with the 12, now as they sat and ate, Jesus said, "Assuredly I say to you, one who eats with me will betray me." Right? That parallels exactly what we just read over there um, in John. And so will betray me. And they began to be sorrowful and say to him one by one, "Is it I?" And another said, "Is it I?" Right? They're like, "Whoa, wait a minute." They're checking the condition of their own heart and mind. Like, "Whoa, Jesus, is it me?" You know? And he answered and said to them, "It is one of the 12 who dips with me in the dish. The Son of Man indeed goes just as it is written of him, but woe to the man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better, it would have been good for that man if he had never been born." And that's really hard, right? Like Jesus is telling you, where Judas is going, right? Like it would have been better for him to have never been born than to be the man who betrays his king, right? To betray his Messiah, And so, and we think, oh well, Satan entered him, not fair, right? But he allowed it, right? His life decisions allowed this to happen, and so this is where we get that that free will from, right? And so he allowed it, and we know he's immediately devastated afterwards, but a little too late, right? And so but again, he's giving us a little clue here. He's given his 12 a clue, right? It is going to be one who dips with me in the dish. This is going to be a part of the meal. We'll discuss that more in the next video here, but over in Matthew, right? It's Matthew 26, 21 through 26. And let's go ahead and read um, 21 through 26. So they did as they were asked, right? And so the time had come. He sat down with them. Now, as they were eating, he said, "Assuredly, I say to you, one will betray me." So picking up where we left off in Luke and John. And so, or excuse me, Mark and John. And they were exceedingly sorrowful, and each one of them began to say, "Lord, is it I?" He answered and said, He who dipped his hand with me in the dish will betray me. The Son of Man indeed goes just as it is written of him. But woe to that man by the Son of Man who is betrayed. It would have been good for him if he had not been born. Then Judas, who was betraying him, answered and said, Rabbi, is it I? And he said to him, You have said it. And so well, I don't know where the other 11 are right at this moment, but it's very clear, right? And he said, You've said it, right? And so he already knows, right? Judas knows. But the other, I guess, aren't hearing it, even though they're all amongst each other, or they're just really not understanding. I think is really what it comes down to. And this will happen again here shortly, and they'll have the same confusion, right? Jesus kind of point blank points out that it's Judas, right? Hey, who does this with me? This is it. And then he does it, and they still don't get it. And so, um, there is a couple different meanings of this dipping in the salt water here. This would have been a little bowl of salt water. Okay. The amongst the most popular is going to be that this concept of remembering that they were freed from Egypt through the Red Sea, right? And so um, this would have been the salt water, the concept here that they're remembering their original exodus and freedom of what he did for them, right? So you have something called uh, my goodness, I was wrote the word wrong. Matcha bread, matzah, M-A-T-Z-A. I was like, what am I writing? Matzah. So to this day, it still looks this way. You can still buy this type of bread. We know that it is unleavened, right? So it doesn't rise. A leavening agent and rising would have represented being puffed up, pride, sin, right? So any kind of leavening would have been sin. So this is unleavened bread. Um, Still today, it is striped and pierced all over it. It's got a whole bunch of little holes in it, and it's got specific stripes in it, right? And they were taking this bread, right? Um, with a representation of Christ. This is what they were actually dipping in the water. And so they didn't know it though, right? At the time, and they didn't know it for how long have they been practicing this Passover meal with this specific bread, right? And with this specific type of, salt water, um, right? The meanings that it had, they don't have the, hindsight 2020 like we do, right? For all this time, they have been partaking in this, and it's always been the plan, right? It's always been a part of the remembrance, a part of the meal, the purpose of the meal that they've always partaken in. And so, it is a representation of Christ and their remembrance they're going to see of him. And so um, let's continue on in John. There's something that I wanted to read and I really enjoyed it. Sorry, this video is a little long. Hang in there with me. Um, and so we're going to jump back over into verse 19. So we have kind of wrapped up what the other ones say with their chronology, and we're jumping back into John's account here, verse 19. So now I tell you before it comes, that when it does come to pass, you may believe that I am he. Most assuredly, I say to you, he who receives whomever I send receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. And so he speaks, and we know how at this point how it's not always like perfectly clear, like, wait a minute, if you believe in him, then you believe in the Father. If you believe in the one who sent, which is going to be these guys, the 12, right? And really 11, we add another one later, right? He sends them out into the world, and if they believe in them, they'll believe in Jesus. They believe in Jesus, they'll believe in the Lord, right? It's that little circle that connects. Verse 21. When Jesus said these things, he was troubled in spirit and testified and said, Most assuredly I say to you, one of you will betray me. Then the disciples looked at one another, perplexed about whom he spoke. Now there was, leaning on Jesus' bosom, one of his disciples, whom Jesus loved. Simon Peter therefore motioned to him and asked who it was from whom he spoke. So I love these couple of little verses here. And I know it adds some time to the story, but hang in there with me. And so first of all, it says leaning on Jesus's bosom, right? That would have been his chest, right? The same thing we talk about snuggling, a babe into her bosom, or a woman, snuggling into her bosom. That's what it means, snuggling into your chest, right? And so it says here, who's reclining on him, right? Because if you just read this quickly, you're thinking, oh, it's Simon, but it's Jesus, right? Or excuse me, it's Jesus, it's John, the one that Jesus loved, whom Jesus loved. That's John. Um, and so we're told that in the beginning of his gospel, right? He was the one whom Jesus loved. And and so we've got John. These guys are laying down on their left side, right? They're leaning back on their upright on their forearm, leaning back and reaching forward, to eat and things as they're there. And John is leaning back onto Jesus's bosom. So just imagine he's laying down in front of Jesus, and John has his head on Jesus's chest. Like, how much realer can it get? Much more human can it get? How close can you get than this, right? Not only are they partaking in this meal with him, right, but they are laid down together, his head on his chest, like you think of, you know, uh, I always think of like the rolling hills in a beautiful movie, someone's head in someone's lap or someone's head on someone's chest, or best friends or, partners in a marriage, something like it's this closeness, it's this intimacy, that you share. And his head is up there on his chest, and Peter looks over and motions to him, right? He's making eye contact with John, and he's asking him, right? It says to ask him who it was who he spoke, right? So they're using pretty much nonverbal cues, just like we would, like lifting up his hands, like who is it, and kind of tilting your head and looking. I love that I'm doing these things. You guys can't see me, and so, but kind of looking like, is it him? Is it him? Like who is it? Do you know? And it's without actually speaking words, but the intimacy here, I love this part. I speak about it a lot. Um, that he's leaning on Jesus's bosom, right? And so then leaning back on Jesus's breast, he said to him, Lord, who is it? So we know that he's already like leaning against him, right? But now he's going to tilt his head back onto his breast, right? So up on his chest, and he's looking up at Jesus, right? He's leaning back onto him and saying, Lord, who is it? Right? There's this intimate connection. Everybody else is like, is it me? Is it me? Is it me? And Peter's like, who is it, dude? Looking around, and John's like, who is it? And but he's got his head just laid on Jesus' chest, right? I love it. Verse 26, Jesus answered and said, it is he to whom I shall give a piece of bread when I have dipped it. And having dipped the bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. How much more clear does it get than that, my friends? That's what I was saying, is like they just don't get it, right? It's like it's funny. It's just funny that they're all sitting there, right? And I mean, we know that Judas already said, "Is it I?" Right? And Jesus is like, "You said it." Right? He's already been called out, right? But clearly these guys didn't hear it. They're conversing amongst themselves or something. But then he answered and told, of course, he's talking to John, right? And but he said, to whom I give this piece of bread, and having dipped the bread, I'm going to hand it to him. He dipped it to Judas, or dipped it, my goodness, dipped it and gave it to Judas, right? And so that's that clear. And so now after the piece of bread, Satan entered him. Then Jesus said to him, what you do, do it quickly. But no one at the table knew for what reason he had said this to him. For some thought because Judas had the money box that Jesus may have said to him, well, go buy those things that we need for the feast, or maybe he should give something to the poor. Having received the piece of bread, he went out immediately, and it was night. We're going to wrap up right there. I know that was a long one. So what just happened there is that now that it's the time, right? We have umpteenth amount of times that the chief priests and the Roman, they've tried to take over Jesus, right? They've tried to kill him, have him ended, all these things, right? But now is the time, right? His hour has come. Jesus has told us this, right? And he's saying what you have to do, go do it quickly. Right. So this is going to happen. A lot of events now are going to happen in very rapid succession. And so just boom, 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 boom. And we're told again, so remember, it is night. So that matters because trials don't happen at night. And so, not in that time and not even in our time, right? And so, they're already going to be breaking some rules, right? But we have a time, a place, a setting, the people, right? And so, the other guys, as he just said, I'm going to give the bread to the whom betrayed me, and he gives it to Judas. They still didn't catch on to that for whatever reason, right? And so they're thinking, well, Judas had the money box. It would have been common at this time, number one, to prepare for the feast. Number two, to be giving to the poor. This would have been a charitable time, right? And so they're just coming up with reasons like, oh, maybe he was doing this or maybe he was doing that, right? They don't have the specific reason as to why he was doing this. And so hang in there with me, guys. I know this one was long, and I will see you guys again in the next video.